Yoshifumi Nitta, a mid-level yakuza, is relaxing at home when a large metal pod suddenly falls on his head. Upon pressing a switch, a naked girl named Hina emerges from the pod, having no memory except for her name. Utilizing psychokinesis, she coerces Nitta into buying her clothes and toys. Nitta soon realizes that he has become her de facto guardian. In response to Hina's desire to attend school, Nitta proposes enrolling her in a nearby school on the condition that she refrains from using her powers. Following an awkward introduction, Hina adjusts to her new school environment. However, her powers accumulate to a dangerous level, and result in an explosion inside Nitta's apartment. Later, Nitta capitalizes on her abilities to clear a piece of land for his company. Upon completing the task, Nitta's yakuza boss summons him to seek vengeance against a rival group. Through a series of mishaps, Nitta unintentionally persuades Hina to handle the job on his behalf, leading her to single-handedly annihilate the entire enemy office using her powers. A similar pod produces a blonde girl who single-handedly defeats a street gang and appropriates their leader's clothing. By chance, Nitta encounters her at a ramen shop and discovers that she possesses the same powers as Hina. With assistance from local homeless contacts, Nitta locates the girl, named Anzu, and employs Hina's help to restrain her without causing further harm. Hina proposes spending one final outing with Anzu before she returns to the future, and both girls stay overnight at Nitta's apartment. Upon bidding farewell, Anzu realizes she is unable to return to her original time. Subsequently, Nitta realizes that his preferred female companions are no longer approaching him, as news spreads that he has a daughter, Hina. Irritated by this change, he starts going out more frequently, while leaving Hina with a can of mackerel for dinner. Growing suspicious, Hina seeks assistance from her classmate Hitomi to locate Nitta but gets easily distracted. Eventually, Hina seeks advice from Yutaka while Hitomi unintentionally becomes a bartender due to the influence of an intoxicated individual. Yutaka and Hina return to the bar to discover Hitomi serving drinks to multiple customers, including Nitta. The group then proceeds to a nearby cabaret club and indulges in a lively party. The following morning, Nitta wakes up to find a substantial bill from the club. Local shopkeepers embark on a pursuit to capture Anzu due to her theft of food items. A homeless man comes to her aid, assisting her in evading the pursuers and teaching her the ways of an honest life within a local homeless encampment. By chance, Nitta encounters Anzu while she is collecting cans for money and offers her 40,000 yen. Initially, she refuses the offer, but eventually accepts, hoping to support her fellow homeless individuals. Unfortunately, Yutaka and the local shopkeepers apprehend her and seize a major portion of the money as compensation for the stolen goods. During the evening, Hitomi covertly works as a bartender under Yutaka's blackmail. Surprisingly, the bar's patrons develop a liking for her drinks, including her homeroom teacher and vice principal. In the meantime, Nitta mentions his desire for Anzu and Hina to switch places at some point. The following day, Hina attempts to clean the apartment to prevent her nightmare scenario, but her lack of attentiveness only exacerbates the situation. After discovering his trashed apartment, Nitta disowns Hina and forces her to leave. Hina quickly depletes all her money and spends a night at Anzu's makeshift dwelling, but eventually tests Anzu's patience as well, resulting in her eviction 3 days later. Meanwhile, Yutaka and the regular patrons at the bar kick Nitta out, believing he abandoned his daughter. Alone and directionless, Hina finds inspiration from a local indie rock band and utilizes her powers for street magic, leading to the band's surge in popularity. However, she decides to take her earnings and departs with the group to purchase a new vase for Nitta as a gesture of reconciliation. Later, at the end of a bartending shift, Hitomi assists Anzu in collecting empty cans, and is introduced to the homeless lifestyle in return. Hitomi tries her best to keep up with Anzu's upbeat demeanor, but ends up falling asleep while standing. Anzu endeavors to locate old televisions for sale to a fellow homeless individual. Despite her initial failure with a cart full of outdated CRT TVs, Anzu persuades a reluctant Hina and Hitomi to assist her. Unfortunately, Hitomi is apprehended by a police officer, while Hina approaches Nitta to request money for a purchase. Eventually, the two succeed in selling one TV each, and Anzu reveals her intention to use the money to buy a video game to play with Hina. Later, Hitoma's classmates spot her, followed by her homeroom teacher, entering a nearby bar. The group of kids, along with Hina and another friend of Hitomi, attempts to uncover the truth. After unsuccessful attempts to interrogate her at school, they tail her to the bar, and Aizawa manages to extract a confession from Hitomi about her bartending job in increasingly raised tones. Nitta receives a summons from his mother and sister to return home and pay his respects to his deceased father. However, when Hina answers the phone, Nitta concocts an increasingly intricate lie to justify her presence. While sharing a drink with his family, Nitta accidentally reveals the incident when he kicked Hina out, prompting him to confess that Hina is his daughter. Meanwhile, the local government is preparing to demolish the homeless encampment. Anzu attempts to rally her fellow homeless individuals, but they are unwilling to engage in a futile struggle. Tearfully, they bid farewell to Anzu, who is subsequently entrusted to Yutako. Eventually, Yutako passes her responsibility to the Hayashi family, owners of the Chinese restaurant Reveling. Recalling her old friends and the lessons they imparted, Anzu decides to work at Reveling alongside her new family. Anzu adapts to the culture shock of her new home and job at the restaurant, while still relying on her habits from the homeless camp. Afterwards, Hina grows weary of being scolded by teachers for dozing off in class. After discussing it with Nitta, Hina decides to run for student council president, with her main goals being able to sleep and eat more at school. Nitta's Oyabun finds this charming and asks his lawyer to write Hina's speech, which she repeats word for word. As a first-year student, Hina is appointed as secretary instead, but she never attends any meetings, so Hitomi is reluctantly asked to take her place. Nitta attempts to invite Yutako out, but she refuses to leave her bar. Later on, Hina and Hitomi manage to convince Yutako to reluctantly agree to a date with Nitta. However, while celebrating, Nitta accidentally breaks Hina's foot. Hina insists that Nitta go on the date anyway, but Yutako rejects him, believing that he is too attached to taking care of Hina. In the present day, Kei Ikariga, the security chief of the enigmatic organization, meets Anzu to observe Hina and assess her progress after causing significant destruction in their original timeline. To Kei's surprise, Hina successfully completes her checklist, but Kei is disheartened to learn that Hina must be sent back to her own time as a result. One day, Hina's classmate Mami Shinju witnesses Hina using telekinesis to dispose of trash and becomes intrigued by the possibility of acquiring psychic powers herself. Hina indulges Mami for a couple of days, using her own abilities to make Mami feel accomplished. However, Mami embarrasses herself when she tries to demonstrate her powers in class without Hina's assistance. Eventually, Kei speaks directly to Hina, informing her that they will be returning to their original time in 3 days. Hina struggles to break the news to Nitta but eventually manages to do so. As a farewell gesture, Nitta treats Hina to her favorite meal before her departure. Unfortunately, upon returning, Hina discovers that Nitta had discarded her original podball, preventing her from going back. Hina goes back to Nitta's apartment only to find him in the midst of celebrating his newfound freedom. Kei opts to summon Mao, a member of her organization, in order to bring an additional transport pod for Hina's retrieval. However, Mao lands on a deserted island and accidentally loses both her orb and the spare one in the ocean. Despite an unsuccessful search for the orbs, Mao creates puppet versions of Hina and Anzu to keep her company during her time on the island. After several months, she eventually discards them, constructs a makeshift raft, and sails away. Meanwhile, Nitta endeavors to arrange for his boss to become the next leader of the family. When Hina suggests that Nitta should assume the role, the Oyabun indulges her momentarily before redirecting the conversation back to Kiyoshi. However, Sabu has already sent a text to Kiyoshi about the initial part of their discussion, prompting Kiyoshi to bury Nitta in cement until the Oyabun himself resolves the misunderstanding. Awkwardly, Kiyoshi decides to name Nitta a lieutenant while he is still encased in cement. Later on, Hina inquires about how everyone should celebrate Nitta's promotion. However, when Nitta arrives home, he is horrified to discover that the setup arranged by Hina resembles more of a funeral than a celebration. 10. Hitoma's mother remains unconvinced when Hitomi honestly reveals her bartending job to her. Yutako, determined to retain her bar's main source of income, pressures Hitomi into renting her own apartment, and directs her towards various temporary jobs to cover the expenses. The mounting stress from excessive work takes a toll on Hitomi, culminating in her collapsing at the entrance of her apartment. While Yutako and her regular customers throw a housewarming party at Hitomi's place, Hitomi seizes the opportunity to involve her mother and disrupt the situation in hopes of returning to a normal life. However, to Hitomi's dismay, her mother is actually pleased with the connections Hitomi has made with different companies and approves of her current situation, leaving Hitomi with no way out. Meanwhile, Anzu receives a 5,000 yen allowance from her parents. While shopping alongside Hitomi, Anzu decides on purchasing a shoulder massaging device for her parents, but falls short of the required amount. At that moment, Sabu appears and takes Anzu to a local horse racetrack. Anzu manages to win the bet on her first race, but subsequently loses her money in the following races. Upon returning home, Anzu compensates by giving her parents personal shoulder massages instead. A video journalist conducts an interview with Nitta, hoping to uncover insights into the contemporary yakuza. However, Nitta turns out to be much kinder than anticipated, leading the journalist to manipulate and invent portions of the interview to portray Nitta as more malicious. The fabricated TV special causes embarrassment for Nitta in front of his yakuza superiors. Meanwhile, as Hina joins her classmates on a ski trip, Anzu stays behind with Nitta. Feeling envious of Anzu's cheerful demeanor, Nitta attempts to spoil her and bring her down to Hina's level. However, Anzu's positivity becomes overwhelming for Nitta, and he begins to see her as the ideal daughter. Unfortunately, their time together is cut short as Anzu must return home. Following her departure, Nitta receives a distressing phone call, informing him that Hina has gone missing in the mountains during the skiing trip. Hina, along with Hitomi and 2 other classmates, becomes lost in the mountains. They construct an igloo and Hina attempts to demonstrate her powers to assist them, but she becomes exhausted due to hunger. The following morning, in an effort to boost Hina's morale, the group pretends to feed her snow-made akura sushi. Eventually, a rescue team locates them after Hina employs her powers to create a colossal sculpture of akura sushi out of snow. The story then shifts to the present, 3 years later, where Mao is excelling as the top student in a Chinese Qigong school specializing in superhuman martial arts. Meanwhile, a Japanese street rocker endeavors to replicate Hina's previous Rakugan feat. Following their chance encounter at a tea house, both Mao and the rocker perceive each other as being insane. However, when the rocker mentions Hina's name, Mao decides to accompany him back to Japan. Nonetheless, the other members of the Qigong school attempt to prevent their departure. A significant confrontation unfolds, and the school's Saifu employs an unfair trial to convince Mao to stay. Nevertheless, Mao subtly employs her powers to overcome the trial, leading the Saifu to reluctantly permit her departure to Japan for the purpose of establishing additional branches of the school. Mao eagerly anticipates meeting her future colleagues.
I hope you liked the recap. If so, don't forget to subscribe and like it.